Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.
Reading. It's like being completely present and completely absent at the same time.
Hello, welcome to Sundoku, the podcast for addicted readers. I'm Annie Hastwell.
And I'm Michaela Andreev. Now, Annie, I want to kick off by asking you a question. It's related to the book I'm bringing to us today. Basically, I'm always just so impressed by how much you do. I mean, you're sitting there, you've just had an operation on your eye this morning, and I call up and say, oh, should we move the booking? And you say, oh, no, that's fine. I'll be fine in the afternoon. And you are fine. But more importantly than all that you do, it's just the joy with which you do things. I really admire it. I don't think you get too hung up on the small stuff. And I just want to know, what's your secret?
Well, that's such a nice thing to say. I'm thinking of that book, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, which I think I have got a mini version of that.
Yeah, that was a huge seller in the early 90s. I
remember
remember it well.
Actually.
Yeah.
I just opened a page of that and it tells you something.
There you go.
And a lot of the people that we've spoken to on this program about what they read say they hate self-help books. There seems to be an absolute distaste for self-help books. Well, I actually quite like them.
Yeah.
I don't actually read them or buy them. I browse them and pick up hints from them. But I think they're kind of marvellous. It's like a modern version of philosophy of
and they just arrive at the time when you need them. You might just sort of see a little quote and think, that helps with me this week.
I know, it sounds corny, but yes, maybe that's my secret. I don't know.
Oh, well, it's a good secret, and I'll have to get my hands on a copy of that again. Anyway, the reason I ask is that my book today made me take a very good hard look at myself. It's called The Disorganisation of Celia Stone, and it's written by Emma Young.
So who is Celia Stone, and what is it about her life, her organisation or disorganisation, that made you pull up your socks?
Well, Celia is a 30-something high achiever, and she has raised organisation to an absolute art form. But it is coming at an enormous physical and mental cost to this character. So as I was reading it, I was thinking, oh yeah, I was a bit like that in my 30s. You know, I was always ticking off boxes. You know, maybe I should give a copy of this book to my high-flying cousins and nieces who are all, you know, flapping about doing a lot of things. But then I sort of went, hang on, and I thought, actually, this is still me to an extent even these days. You know, sometimes I just think I'm putting way too much energy into trying to be organised, and I still just feel, you know, super inadequate. So maybe this book has come to me at the right time, and I should be thinking a little bit about being a little more disorganised.
I think that's the message of the times, isn't it? We're hearing it all the time. Everybody's stretched to the max, and it's all about mindfulness and pulling back.
Yeah, but we're not doing it. We talk about it, but are we doing it?
We still write lists, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, my book gave me an epiphany or two. Who are you going to speak to this week, Annie?
Well, a very successful and very independent romance writer, Davina Stone, and she's chosen to go the self-publishing route rather than wait to be noticed by the publishing world, which I thought was interesting, and it's worked for her.
Yeah, is she going to share her secret of romance writing success with us?
Yeah, she'll be talking about the formula that romance writers always follow, no matter how weird or wacky the romance may be. And it is a genre that goes in all sorts of directions, from the boy next door, the best friend's boyfriend, the kind of usual romance type plots, right these days to alien and monster romance, which I find really fascinating.
Sort of monster, it's a bit bestial, isn't it?
A bit Beauty and the Beast.
Oh, okay.
Almost
all right.
from the modern times.
That's better.
But the thing about romance writing is there's always got to be a happy ending.
Yeah.
And there's always got to be a sex scene, which, as she explains, can be quite exhausting to write.
You do have to remember things like where body bits are and, you know, have you left their socks and shoes on, because that's really unattractive. So from the point of view of the physical side of what you're writing, you have to, that's quite tiring to go, okay, left leg goes here, right leg goes there.
Davina came to writing from a career as an occupational therapist, and her own story is a lovely one of having a life-changing experience, a life-threatening experience, and rediscovering halfway through her life the little girl in her that used to write and just want to write.
Oh, how lovely. I do love a romance, but let's first hear about a character who gets her kicks from making lists and ticking boxes. Emma Young is the talented author of The Disorganisation of Celia Stone. I started by asking her to describe Celia and what's going on in her life.
Celia Stone is a financial counsellor by day. She is a struggling author by night, trying to get published. And she has productivity and organisation made into an art form. Basically, she's honed by years of books and podcasts and self-help gurus and you name it, so that she can be an absolute machine. She's a good partner, she's a good daughter, she's a good wife, she's a good colleague, a good friend, you name it. She's covering every base, and the only person who sees what it takes to keep all this together is not a person at all, but it's her diary. So it's a diary novel, a year in her life, in which she records the moment where her husband asks her a question that throws a curveball into her life that is so big that for the first time ever, just getting more organised is not going to cut it. So she is about to see all of that scaffolding blown down, and she's got to figure out a new way to live.
And all of this organising is taking a toll on her mental and her physical health as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. She discovers a problem with her fertility. So it's a problem that all of that kind of restriction and all of that stress has created in her body, and it's interlocking with the development of an anxiety issue as well. So she's kind of reached this weird stage of life where she's found out that all of the effort that she's put into being fit and healthy and, you know, beyond reproach is something that's actually destroyed her health, which I think is something that many women may be able to relate to.
Yeah. And it's marketed as a humorous book, and there certainly is, it's humour in there. But I thought above all it was a very moving book. And I'm guessing, is there a lot of you in Celia, or a bit of Celia in you, that this comes from somewhere deep?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I wrote this book when I was on the tail end of a journey of self-discovery, quite like that one. I had worked really, really hard to get my first book out of the stalls, and I had realised along the way that I had a fertility problem that had been created from a combination of too much stress, too much restricted eating, and all of that kind of thing. And it had really started to affect my mental health, all this overwork. And, you know, I had to learn a lot of things about learning how to let go, how to stop, how to rest, and how to kind of begin to eat like a normal person again and let go of all these disordered habits. And in doing so, I started to finally have time to think about how all of this had happened. You know, I was like, I grew up normal. What happened to me? Where did this person come from?
Yeah.
And in kind of digging through the reasons for all that, I suddenly had a lightning bolt moment where I thought, this sounds like a book plot.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, then I started to write.
You do reveal a lot in the book. What's that process for you like, of giving up privacy, I suppose, in order to make these points?
Oh my gosh, it's extremely weird. It's extremely weird. It was odd to write it, but I had put out my first novel by this stage, which was called The Last Bookshop, and it was another humorous novel, but one that was quite warm and cozy and was very invented, and I think I played it quite safe with that novel, emotionally speaking. And I really did want to write something that was raw and was true. And, you know, writing is how I work through all these really complex issues in life and how I think about the world. So I wanted to make sense of it. And so the way to make myself do that was just to think along the way, are you really going to let people read this? Oh my God, this is so raw. And then I just had to go, think about that later. You're not thinking about that now, you're thinking about writing. After that, I got a contract for that book so quickly that I never have really had a chance to consider if it was a good idea. So now it's happening. And I really do want to talk about all these issues of work and family and overwhelm and these issues that everybody's dealing with today. So, you know, that requires being brave, and that's what I've told myself all along.
Yeah, I think you have been brave. And it actually took me by surprise, and it made me look more deeply at myself. And I think what you were really digging down to is, you know, what motivates your actions? You know, is it a need for approval? Is it, I don't know, there's any number of things that could motivate a person, but I think you've obviously looked a lot at your values and your motivations, and it strikes me that you're leading a very conscious and a very deliberate life.
Well, I think so, but I think that everybody these days is trying to figure out how to live and how to deal with this world that we're in, which has so many huge problems, and there are so many forces that are kind of conspiring to keep us distracted and ineffective. And I think there are so many people who feel that instinctively, and they're all trying to figure out how to live and how to live with themselves. And those are the issues that I'm trying to explore with this.
Yeah. And you've also, outside of the book, you've put your money where your mouth is, because you're donating half of your royalties to charity. Did you want to tell me a little bit about what you're doing and why?
Well, I guess, it's obviously very important to me, this question of the world that we're going to leave our children. I have a young child myself, and I want to be able to tell him that I've done everything that I can to, try to leave him a better world. And so I can take the money that I make in royalties from this book, and I can give half of it to Beyond Zero Emissions. I found the charity through looking at an organisation called Giving Green, so that evaluates different environmental charities all over the world in terms of their efficiency and what they do with money and how effective they are. And that was the charity that really spoke to me, because as a journalist, I've seen, I think, how much the environmental space needs good stories and needs positive action, and to see that green energy can transform our world, I think we need hope. And that strikes me as an organisation that is promoting a real and effective way that we can transition to green energy in some of the most kind of fossil fuel dependent societies of Australia. And it is creating transition plans for those communities, and it's in politicians' ears about how that can be achieved in a really practical way. And that just really spoke to me, because I'd been spending years writing doom and gloom stories, in my day job, and I felt like something else was needed. And I think that they're doing good work.
Authors notoriously don't earn a great deal of money, but they do spend a hell of a lot of time writing a book. So it's a big...
I'm never going to come out ahead. I've accepted that.
Your donation is even larger than financial, because you're really giving them the time that it took you to write this book.
Yeah, thank you very much. I feel, really passionately about all these topics, and I really feel that there could be little decisions that all of us make right now that could have a huge impact that we can't foresee, but we have to have faith that at some point something that somebody does is going to be a tipping point for something else. And I think we need to have that faith and to keep doing as much as we can.
Yeah. Well, I think your book, it doesn't just look at Celia Stone and her situation. It does look at the environment and the social world that we live in now. I think you're helping people in on a number of fronts with this book by being so honest, as we've said earlier. I mean, I could very much identify with the type of person Celia is. When I was in my 20s and 30s, just constantly trying to tick off lists and be everything to everyone, I read a book called The Tao of Pooh by Benjamin Hoff. It was written in 1982, I think, and I read it in the 90s. And Pooh sort of personifies that Taoist principle of effortless doing. And
I think I know that book.
You know that one? Yeah, it's a good one. But your book really struck me that that Celia Stone is going through this process of just learning how to do a few things with a little less effort, and hopefully still, arrive at a good place. And interestingly enough, now that I'm in my 50s and I'm facing a whole new set of pressures, I suppose, of staying healthy, trying to, stave off aging, remaining, relevant to family and society and so forth, that I really found your book very helpful in making me take a closer look at myself and not trying to live everything by a list again. I think it's crept back in my 50s. So.
You have to constantly guard against the list.
Well, this is the thing. I think if you're organised, you create a list, but the list then takes over and it really becomes a whole list of deficits.
And you have to face the fact that, the time is finite and the list is endless.
Yeah, it's crept back in with me, constantly thinking, well, if I just tick off this list, I'll feel really good. But I've never written a list of all the things I did do, which probably would be a lot more satisfying to read.
Now that is a good idea.
Yeah, forget the deficit list. But as you say, you've written in a diary format. Can you tell me what's the appeal of that format? But were there problems from a writer's point of view with presenting it as a diary?
There were certainly many challenges, but I am a lover of the diary format. I've always loved those books since I was a kid. You know, I grew up reading Adrian Mole. In my teenage years, I read So Much to Tell You by John Marsden, his debut book, which is such a powerful novel, and the follow-up to that was so powerful as well. I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. That was so good. And then later, of course, there was Bridget Jones, which we all read and all loved, I think. And I just love that combination of that absolute intimacy and the fun of being in, and I have always found it so clever that those authors make it so trivial and funny and seemingly just full of inconsequentials, but they still bring you barreling through this narrative that is so readable. And I really wanted to do that myself because I love those books. So I did look to those books for inspiration and how they did it, and I paid particular attention to the time periods they covered, how much time is given to a day and a month. And so I thought, if that's how Bridget's done it, that's how I can do it. So, of course, I was bound by the narrative of Celia's health journeys, and I had to find a way to fit the story in around that and give her as much character development as she needed up front, but also slotting some of it throughout the story so that it wasn't a top-heavy story with a very slow start. So there was a big blurt first draft, but in the rewrites, there was also like a lot of very painstaking structural work to kind of ensure that the plot was moving quickly because, as you say, it's a funny book. I wanted it to be a very, readable book that you couldn't put down. And so I made sure that, I was kind of dropping a lot of hints and, doing all the things that a pacey, well-plotted book does. So it was difficult, but it was also fun.
Can you talk a little bit about, what the editor might have done to have helped you put that final polish on the book?
Georgia Richter at Fremantle Press is a fantastic editor. I had always wanted to work with her, so it was a bit of a dream to be able to do so. She was not only very sensitive about the subject matter, which was important with a book like this, but she also made me do all that structural work in the first place. And she told me when I was going too far with the detail of some of Celia's routines. For example, you'll see early on, Celia is so overwhelmed by her kind of schedule that she thinks, maybe I'll just make a little schedule for my weekends and organise those weekends by the hour, and then I'll feel better. So she does that. But, in the original draft, I had every time there's a weekend in the story, I had her schedule for that weekend. And on her advice, I dialed that back and took those out.
As long as you had fun writing them, that's the main thing.
Yeah. So I took those out, and she did a lot of work on the typography because this is a book that contains her lists and her shopping lists, her attempts to kind of plot out her life and tick off things. The typography is very important, and Georgia has played with, the settings of that and the typography in a way that I think has led to something that is really convincing as a diary and is not difficult to read.
Yeah, absolutely. And how are you going with the writing process these days? Are you finding more enjoyment or joy or any easier with as your books go along?
It's funny that you say you have to guard against these things or they creep back, because you can learn so much and then you can backslide. So this book has been really well received, which has been very exciting for me, but it's also meant a lot of promo work. And I've had to kind of take some time to do that, and I've spent a lot of time on that, and it's made me have to be very organised and focused on the schedule.
List's back again, isn't it?
Yeah, which is kind of, there will be a time when I need to kind of stop and turn inwards again and allow the space for the next book to come, because at the moment, I'm juggling work and promos and parenting a 3-year-old, and, It's a lot. So I am mindful that I will have to practice what I preach at some point in the near future, and make sure that those lessons aren't lost in the drive to create the next book. Oddly enough, to create, you need to slow down and just kind of let the silence return. So that's what I'll be doing next.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Emma Young, may the next book bring you much joy.
Thanks so much, Michaela. It's lovely to chat to you.
And I really do wish Emma well. She's a deep thinker, but with a lightness of touch.
Do you think it's a book for everyone?
Look, The Disorganisation of Celia Stone, I would say, is the perfect gift for those fabulous women you might know in their 20s or 30s who are doing a whole lot. But if you do chance to have a sneaky read of it before you pass it on to them, you might also be struck by some of its universal truths. Okay, Annie, let's get romantic.
Yes, the secret pleasure of so many readers, not always secret, but often. It's a genre that outsells every other, and it comes in an astonishing array of formats, from historical to erotic, and as I mentioned before, some really weird stuff featuring aliens and monsters. Davina Stone has just published the 6th book in her series called The Laws of Love, and it's called The Felix Factor.
It's a story of opposites attracting. Felix is a quiet gardener and Paige is a social influencer. So, yeah, it winds in the story of two people who are very different coming together and falling in love and finding common ground.
Let's talk about the formula behind a romance story, because it very much has to be the often strong silent type at the beginning that looks a bit awkward, turns out to be the love interest, but you can kind of tell what's going to happen, can't you?
I think, yes, indeed. People read a romance for what we call the HEA, or the happy ever after. And you know when you pick up a romance, you're going to have that happy ever after, but you don't know the journey and how they're going to get there. And I think that's the excitement of reading a romance. It's the emotion, it's the emotional journey between two characters. So yeah, absolutely. Formula, there's different ways to do it. There are certain things that tend to make romances more attractive. You like me to elaborate?
Yes.
Okay, so generally there's a sense of the couples finding each other, finding some sort of, there's enemies to lovers is a very popular one. So there's often a conflict or several conflicts. And usually there has to be, for a romance to be really attractive to people and for them to be page turning, it has to have the dark moment or the time when the romance looks like it's not going to happen, that their love's going to fall apart, and then somehow they put that right and come together. And I think that is a very attractive thing for romance readers to go, oh gosh, they're getting to the dark moment. Oh no,
it's not going to work after all.
But inside they also know that it will work out in the end, and that's the attraction. You know, you cannot kill your hero or your heroine. Like, it's just, no, you can't do it.
It just makes people feel good about life. Do you think that's what the attraction of romance reading is?
I think it's it makes them feel good about life. It's a way to relax because you know that you're going to take this journey that is going to have a happy outcome. And I think, you know, the popularity of it is, in a world that's so uncertain, you've got a bit of certainty when you pick up that romance. Even if the journey is incredibly rocky, and actually the more rocky the better, you are going to end up going, on the last page. That's lovely. So, yeah.
There are certain times in history, aren't there, where people just want rom-com. They want movies like that and they want books like that.
Yeah.
Do you think we're in one of those at the moment?
I think we are. I think, you know, the popularity of romance is just, it's going through the roof still. And rom-coms are particularly popular at the moment. So my rom-coms do bring in mental health. They do bring in conflict. They're not all happy, but the endings are.
What kind of social issues have you dealt with over the 6 novels?
Well, the first one, The Alice Equation, deals with social anxiety and panic attacks, loss and grief. Sounds very heavy, doesn't it? And found family, which I didn't realise was actually a trope. But found family is when, you know, the person makes a journey and they find a parent or a brother or a sister or it doesn't even have to be their original family, but they find a family, they find where they belong. And that's really what happens in the Alice equation. So finding who you are and where you belong, and a really cute little love story as well.
Of course, that's part of it.
The second book, The Wally Principle, that deals with post-traumatic stress disorder. It deals with disordered eating. It's set in a work situation. Don't want to say too much, but in a hospital. So it's a medical romance as well. So there's lots of different tropes that happen. But again, finding out who you are, becoming comfortable with who you are, and finding your place in the world and your partner. And so that's that one. A Kiss for Carter is about the best friend of the Aaron in the Alice equation, and he was bullied at school, and he's very tall, and it actually has the subtitle a tall story, because it's a tall love story, because he meets a girl who is also very awkward in life, and they fall in love, and they're both very tall. It's just for tall people.
A little subgenre all of its own.
Tall romance. And then the Felicity theory is between an English girl who comes out to Australia and meets a very uptight, very successful Australian, and she's actually the one that takes him on a road trip, and they go across Australia, and that's full of lots of little comic. And they go across Australia in a van that belonged to a surfer called the Shag and Wagon. So it's quite fun seeing Oliver, the main character, unravel as he takes this journey into love. So that's fun too. And then the Evie effect is set in England, and between a rock star who's down on his luck and has depression, and a sculptress with pink hair who they're setting up a holiday park based around his band, and it's quite crazy. The whole thing is very crazy, but it also deals with mental health, self-harm and depression. So sounds like there are heavy themes, but I try to deal with them very lightly, because I think mental health is something that we do need to talk about, but it doesn't always need to be heavy. So that's the summing up. There's a whole heap more that happens, obviously, but
It's important, I gather, in a romantic novel that it has to be more than the boy, girl, or whatever, the lovers. There has to be a subplot that has a bit of rigour to it. I suppose what you've just talked about is a little bit like that, but more complex plots do you look for?
I tend to be a real plotter. You'll find some romances have more of a simple plot, and rural romances often have a much gentler plot to them, but I like a bit of intrigue as well. So most of my novels have in fact, they get more intrigue based as they go along. And so in the Evie effect, there's a whole problem with the band manager and what has happened to Byron, the rock star, and you don't know what happens, and then you find out, and you don't know what had happened to Evie to make her so anti-love, and then you find out. I guess you've got to have things that make the reader want to turn the page and say, why are they like that? Why are they fighting? What is going on? Why is he being so obnoxious? Why is she being so obnoxious? Yes, I like to put in lots of plot. There's always a twist.
And also, I guess the reader knows that the two main characters are going to end up together, so there's no spoiler alert required, really. So I guess the subplot has to drive the why through it.
The subplot and the emotional journey. So, you think, oh, they're really together now. My books are quite spicy, so quite steamy. So they have a love scene, and it's known that when there's a love scene, it sort of takes the tension down afterwards. So then you've got to go, okay, what am I going to do to bring the tension up? And internal conflicts between the characters tend to be considered stronger than, so they're lying in bed together, they're all beautiful, and suddenly there's a fire in the house is what's called an external conflict. It's much better for one of them to just go, oh, I don't want to get close because of some story in their past, and they draw away for whatever reason. So that's an internal conflict, but it's good that the reader doesn't know what that is. So that becomes in itself a subplot of why are they doing this, rather than the house burning down. Though the house burning down at the same time could be interesting.
So is that what you do? You just think, right, okay, they're in bed. What now? And then the house burning down, or you just have to come up with some kind of diversionary tactic to keep the plot moving along?
I guess I've worked that out beforehand. I worked with people in a therapeutic role for many years, and so emotional conflicts are something I'm quite comfortable with working out in my head, I guess, because I've seen a lot of them. You know, when I'm working out the plot, I know there are going to be these big dark moments that have to be got through. That I don't just come up with one at the time, because that would seem very forced, but I lead them there, I push them there. I go, okay, you're going here, and I'm managing you to go there. So yeah, I'm a control freak of my characters.
It seems that the first sex scene between our protagonists is a really important moment in a romantic novel. How hard is it to write those scenes?
It varies. They're relatively easy to write if the character arc, meaning the character's lead up to that scene, I've got it right. If I haven't got it right, then it's all messy, and often I have to go back and rewrite, because it's often the emotional tension happening, you know, like it may be a moment where they don't expect to kiss and suddenly they kiss. Well, you can't just throw the reader into that. You've got to actually have led up with some emotional, so the reader understands what is going on emotionally. So my characters, I write from both points of view. So when I write a sex scene, it comes from both points of view, and you see the lead up from both characters. So, you know, I don't what's called head swap, but I do certain scenes where, you know, there's a tension building. She's really feeling the attraction. He's feeling the pull in his scene. And then, you know, something happens that builds them into suddenly having a very emotive and physical interaction. So it then becomes, I mean, I laugh with other romance writers, because we often say it's so exhausting writing a sex scene, you know, like, and you do have to remember things like where body bits are, and, you know, have you left their socks and shoes on, because that's really unattractive. So from the point of view of the physical side of what you're writing, you have to, that's quite tiring to go, okay, left leg goes here, right leg goes there, but they don't need to know everything. But also the build-up, emotional build-up to that scene has to be right, otherwise they're just not going to be it. And I think that's where you say it can be a bit formulaic, because you can almost see when I read a lot of romance. I love romance, but I also write it, so I research. And you go, okay, they thought on page 56 they needed to put in a sex scene, and it should never be like that. Some books may not have that until the end. Some books may never have that because it's a closed-door romance. It's about the emotional connection. Yeah.
Is there ever a tragic ending in a romance?
No.
Oh, absolutely no.
No. It's a love story. I mean, you can have a parent dying or something, but the 2 or 3 or however many protagonists there are in a love story, like, you know, there's many ways to have love stories, not just between a male and a female, obviously. But that has to be very satisfying and complete, as it's not a romance, it's a love story.
How do you see the romance genre going these days? Is it moving into new territory?
Oh, yes.
With sexuality, you know, and identity politics and things like that?
Hugely, hugely different areas, and it's really exciting. And I think there are areas like reverse harem, where you can understand what that is. It's a woman having several lovers, all of them very devoted to her. Could be male, female. That's a hugely popular, newish genre, I guess. It's been around probably 15 years or so. But this idea of, and it actually has hashtag why choose, is so why do you have to choose one lover when you can have several? And then there's another area which is alien romance, monster romance, paranormal romance has always been around really since, I guess, the days of Twilight have become very popular, but that is branching into newer and newer areas. Don't get me started on that, because I could talk about that for a long time. I think it's reflecting the needs of society, of different sexual identities and sexual preferences, and romance is keeping up with that really amazingly.
In spite of its incredible popularity, and as you say, its changing form, romance continues to be considered a guilty pleasure. People hide their romance books and put their literary books out on the shelf and things like that. Give me a defence of romance. Why should romance be taken seriously as a literary genre?
I think because love is wonderful, and I think we all need to understand and learn more about what love is, and I think many romances are very good at that. Many romance writers are extremely good at defining what a loving relationship is, and there's dark romance, so you can read about really evil people, and that's very, very popular, the dark hero, but or heroine. But I think in general, romance gives people ways to define love and emotion, and it's all about emotion and learning about emotion. And I think that is a wonderful thing to be reading about and understanding more. We need more emotional literacy, and I think romances really deliver on that. So
how did you cross over from being an occupational therapist to being a romance writer? I'm really curious about what moment you decided to move into this area.
I've always written stories. I wrote a gothic romance when I was 12 years old called Grandpapa's Secret and illustrated myself. And I was quite in love with the hero, but the kids I was writing about were my age, so but it was a kid's story. And then I worked for over 2 decades with mainly in mental health and chronic pain management, and dealt with people's feelings and emotions day in, day out. But I never stopped wanting to be a writer. And then I had a health crisis of my own. I had a repair to a hole in the heart I didn't know I had from birth. And I just decided this is the time I'm going to... In fact, someone said to me when I was recovering, why don't you... I used to love writing romance. I want to write romance. I said, well, do it. And so I did. And here I am, 6, 7, nearly 8 books later. So, yeah.
And what's the process of getting into that world? Did you have to do classes in how to write a romance, or did you just launch yourself into it?
No. I'd lost my hubris by the time I was a bit older and realised I couldn't launch myself into it. I joined Romance Writers of Australia, which is a wonderful organisation, and did classes and learnt a lot and read a lot and had writing mentors, and entered competitions and became a finalist. So I thought, well, it can't be that bad. So I then had an idea for a romance. It went through, with the Alice equation, went through 3 different editors, and I tried to get it published traditionally. And then I just thought, you know what, I could write probably 6 novels in the time it might take me to get an agent or get published by a traditional publisher. So I kept writing and publishing them, and for what we call an independent author, indie author, they've been pretty successful. I'm pretty happy with how they've gone, and I might be still sitting waiting. So I don't have enough life left to sit and wait. Health crises make you think I'm going for it. So, and indie publishing now is it's up there with trad publishing. It really is holding its own. I worked when I was young in a publishing company in London for a short while, and I sort of saw behind the scenes, and I thought to myself, I'd had my own business before, so the idea of marketing, the idea of publishing myself wasn't scary. So I said, I'm going to go for it. So I have.
One last thing, Davina, I want to take you into your new territory, which is the genre we mentioned before, which is monster romance. Can you just give me a little clue to what you're working on?
Okay, so I'm publishing under a different pen name, Lilith Stone. So I don't hide it from Davina Stone, but I don't mark it the same way. It's kind of like if you can imagine the Lord of the Rings with sex. So it
sounds like a winner.
Yeah, so you write about creatures like orcs and minotaurs and shapeshifters. So it's paranormal romance, but the characters are the protagonists are humans and monsters, and it's proving remarkably popular. It can do. It can work any way you want. I mean, that's the joy of it. It can work all sorts of ways.
So it's not Beauty and the Beast. It's not always the human woman and the monster.
Very often it is, but it doesn't have to be. No, it can be the other way around. But it's influenced by all sorts. It's influenced by fantasy. So you can. That's why I could say come back to Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. What would have happened if they'd all grown up and got very physical with each other? It's influenced by those kinds of archetypal stories, and it takes people into a world where they can be and see and be with anyone they want to, whether they've got horns and tails, or your demons are very popular at the moment. So, yeah.
So no limits.
No limits. No limits. So it's a lot of fun to write, but it's also very respectful, and I write what's called cozy monster romance, which sounds cozy, but does have quite a lot of sex in it. Yes.
Romance writer Davina Stone. Davina has 6 books in her series The Laws of Love, and the latest of those is The Felix Factor. And she's also fearlessly launched into monster romance writing territory, where she has 2 novels under the name Lilith Stone. If that's your thing, watch out for The Gargoyle Grinch and Mail Order Minotaur.
This is Sundoku, the podcast for people who know that surreal feeling of having a great time in great company and suddenly remembering you're just reading and you're actually quite alone.
I know that feeling so well, but what about the other feeling of desolation when you have to close the book?
The joys and the sorrows.
And if you'd like to share a couple of your favourite books with the Sundoku tribe, drop us a line or even a voicemail to sundokukast@gmail.com.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Michaela Andreev.
And I'm Annie Hastwell. Happy reading. Catch you next time.
This podcast is produced by 4 book addicts who are refusing treatment.
Annie Hastwell.
Kath Keneally.
Sarah Martin.
And me, Michaela Andreev. Our thanks to composer Quincy Grant for the music. And if you want to know more about the books, the authors, or the music featured in this episode, check out the show notes. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Sundoku Cast. That's TSUNDOKU Cast.
Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.